right, we are live. Good afternoon to all the viewers. You are now tuned into Siren Sundays. What's Splashing? I'm your host, Lashanti the Siren, and this episode is proudly sponsored by Science and Perspective because we all need a little more science and a lot more perspective. Today's episode, we have the wonderful Dr. Megan Davis with us from the Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute. I always feel like oceanographic is one of those tricky words from FAU. So welcome so much to the show, Megan. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Lashanti. It's wonderful to be here. I am a research professor at Florida Atlantic University at Harbor Branch Oceanographic, and I am an aquaculturist and a marine scientist.
Awesome. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and some of your experience? Like, how did you get to work in Queen Conch Aquaculture?
Well, it's interesting because I actually met the Queen Conch for the first time when I was a teenager in the Bahamas. And I was introduced to the Queen Conch by the fishermen in the Bahamas. And I fell instantly in love with the Queen Conch. And I wanted to be a conch farmer from that day on. And so all my focus has been on conch farming. And after I got my bachelor's degree, I went down to the Turks and Caicos. And I worked in a small hatchery there. And then I was the co-founder and the chief scientist of the Caicos Conch Farm on Providenciales. And then after that, I came back to the States. And I continued my studies. I did my PhD in the Exumas at Lashanti Island. And I have done quite a bit of work on and off throughout the years in the Bahamas, especially the latest one was in 2019 when I worked down in Mariah Harbor Key National Park with BNT and with Catherine Booker and also with Lester Giddings and other partners. So I have a very strong connection to conch and the Bahamas.
That's exciting to hear. Can you tell us a little bit about what is aquaculture and are there any differences between typical aquaculture and Queen Conch aquaculture?
Yeah, that's a great question. So aquaculture can be both freshwater and it can also be saltwater or what we call marine. And so it's the farming of plants and animals in saltwater. It can be in tanks, it can be in ponds, it can be in the ocean. And so conch aquaculture is actually mariculture, which means marine aquaculture. And it's also done on land in a laboratory. And also it's done in the ocean as well.
That's exciting. So can you tell us about how you farm and raise these conch? Can you kind of take us through this process of raising a conch?
Well, I'd love to do that. And it just so happens that we're in the Noguabo, Puerto Rico Queen Conch Hatchery, which is located in the Fishing Association with the fishers here in Puerto Rico. And it's a partnership aquaculture hatchery with Harbor Branch and also with my colleague Raimundo Espinoza, who's with Conservación Conciencia, and then with the Fishing Association and the president of the association and the fishers. It's a funded project with NOAA Fisheries. And so we've just started our first season in June, and I'd love to show you around the hatchery since we're here.
I would love to see it. I'm sure our guests will too.
Okay, so let's start over here. And what I'm going to show you here are the eggs. This is the egg incubator. And if you look very closely, you'll be able to see the eggs inside the containers. And the eggs take 3 to 4 days until they're ready to hatch. So the fishers bring them in from the ocean. They just bring in a very small amount because every egg mass has 500,000 eggs. So we can't hatch them all. So we leave some with the mother conch and we bring in a small amount and hatch them here. Once they're ready to hatch, and they actually hatch at nighttime, we end up putting them in a tank. And I'm going to show you here our larval tank. And you can see the eggs are inside the tank. And they're going to hatch tonight. And what we found out is they hatch at 9 o'clock at night. and that's when it's dark, and they can emerge out of the eggs. And so hundreds of thousands of conch will hatch tonight in the hatchery. We have two masses ready. And so if you look behind me, these are the larval tanks. And we have 5 of them, so we can raise lots of villagers during the season, during the aquaculture, or during the breeding season, which happens to be about April until around September, October, which is the same in the Bahamas as well.
Nice.
I'm going to take you over and show you where we grow the food. So we have the microalgae here that we feed them. And we also have some that are growing in these really tall, long tubes.
Wow.
And so we start off with test tubes, and then we scale it up over time. And I have one more place to show you in here. We're very excited because we have a metamorphosis happening right here in the hatchery in the guavo. And we have several hundred conch that are being cued by their seagrass blades, which is their natural cue in the wild. And then down here, we have, I hope you can see them.
Yeah, they're so small.
They're tiny little 2-week-old conch that have just metamorphosed. So that's the life cycle in a hatchery. Mm-hmm. But our goal is to grow the conch until they're this size here, which is about 7 centimeters, a few inches, and they'll take 1 year to grow to that size, and then we'll put them out into the ocean for restoration purposes.
Awesome. That is so exciting, and I think it's really interesting that you mentioned, one, that the conch hatch at 9 p.m. So hilarious. I think that's the time babies need to go to bed. But that's actually really interesting to hear. And even, I know there's always been this misconception that a lot of people, especially Bahamians, don't realize that conch have a breeding season. And you know, there's been a lot of this like back and forth on whether or not in the Bahamas we should kind of adhere to also having a conch season, a queen conch season, like with some of the other fisheries. So it's nice to know that conch actually do have a certain time of year where they need that time to breed and then reproduce and have their young. So how successful do you see this process for the saving of the queen conch? You know, we've seen a lot of articles come out talking about, you know, in 15 years, there will be no more queen conch. Do you think that this is the solution or just one of them?
Yes, Lashanti, this is a very important discussion to have. And I would say that aquaculture is one of many solutions that need to be put together. And so the most important thing is that we have to, there's no one easy answer to bringing back the conch or to replenishing the conch to the numbers that we remember. And so the aquaculture allows us the opportunity to grow conch for restoration, but it also allows us this opportunity to do conservation, education, and awareness.
Right.
And so having the fishers in the community, for instance, here in Puerto Rico, come and visit and learn more about the conch. It also helps to understand how long the conch takes to reach maturity. And so I would definitely go back to what you were saying, that it's one of the multitude of solutions that are needed for us all to work together. It's really a together effort that we need to do.
Right. And so as far as comparing conch in the wild to conch in hatcheries, what is the difference in the success rate of these hatching of these conch?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. In aquaculture, they have no predators. So
right.
Essentially, the survival increases considerably. So in the wild, the female lays about 9 to 10 times a season. So she's laying close to 5 million eggs every year. And so out of those, only less than 1% survive, which what she's trying to do is make sure that her and her mate survive, essentially. So in a hatchery, we actually can increase our survival considerably by being able to raise much more of the eggs that hatch. And the percentage depends on the size of the hatchery and the number of conch that can be grown in that hatchery. So, but the percentage really does increase. The one thing that is most important, though, is that going back to the small conch here, the hatchery conch that are raised here, we need to make sure that they're raised to be similar to the wild conch in terms of being able to sort of, we have to have the behavior to eat and to bury and to protect themselves against predators. So that's one of the things that we'll be working on during our studies here.
Awesome. And I know earlier you mentioned that you use the seagrass, which is also their natural cue in the wild, to be their cue here. So does that mean a conch in the wild would be floating around for maybe like how long? Like about a year until it actually gets that cue to metamorphosize?
Well, yeah, so the larvae take 3 weeks to go through or to get ready for metamorphosis.
Okay.
And then what they do is they have this really amazing behavior. It's called a swim crawl. So here they are swimming around as larvae with their beautiful lobes and their shell. They've already developed a shell at this stage. And they go to the bottom, the sandy seagrass, and they touch down. And they say, oh, is this where I want to metamorphose or not? And if it's not the right place, then they'll swim back up and then they'll find another place. And so some of the studies that we did, at least off the island in the Exumas, was to understand more about why the nurseries are where they are and how the conch decide to choose which place is the best place for metamorphosis.
So just for my curiosity, I feel like I have so many questions. And viewers, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot them in the comments. But how far would you say, as far as from the conch starts to metamorphosize after its cue till straight through its adult life? Like how far is its actual range? Like from being in that seagrass, do you find that as they're adults, they travel very far from when they originally started?
They will. They'll start in the shallow seagrass area and then they'll migrate. And they start that migration at about 2 years of age when they're still, I believe you call them rollers. So they don't have the lips yet. And then as soon as they start, with their flared lip, they're typically in deeper water. Like a lot of the adult conch are found in deeper water. You still find some adults in the seagrass beds for sure. But some of the more typical places are in the sandier coral rubble, nice wave or not so much wave energy, but good current flow in that area.
And so I know one of the things, and again, I have so many questions, right? One of the things that we talk about here in the Bahamas is that flared lip, right? That's when you know it's an adult. But as recent studies have shown, you want to get to that lip thickness. And so oftentimes I've heard fishermen kind of argue that, oh, well, even though the conch shell is thin, it's still big. And you'll see a smaller conch that does have that lip thickness. Is that just because like how humans are tall and short? Are conchs kind of similar in that way?
So that's the interesting thing about the queen conch, because the shell length can be very different depending on the habitat. So, and depending on how fast they're growing. But what I found in aquaculture is that they have a biological clock. And so when they reach about 3 years of age, no matter what size they are, they'll start forming their lip.
Wow.
So size is not a good indication. The better indication is exactly what you were talking about, the size, the flare of the lip and the thickness of the lip, because that gives the indication of the maturity and that the conch has had a chance to reproduce. So length is not as important as the lip thickness.
Awesome. So, and even when it comes to, you say after about a year when they get 7 centimeters, that's when you'll then release them into the wild. Do you find that conch in the wild are maybe not as big as the ones that are grown in the hatchery? Like when they hit like 1 year old?
Actually, that's a really interesting question because that's something that we've been studying. And in a hatchery, sometimes they grow slower because they may not have all the food that they want. In the wild, they can graze all the time on a wide variety of different epiphytes, which is in their seagrass beds. So in the hatchery, what we're trying to do is make them food that's similar to what they have in the wild. And so it's kind of a combination of algae, but we also make like a gel diet with some seaweed in it. And so what we're aiming for, though, is to make sure that they do grow as fast as the ones in the wild and that they produce those spines that help them with protection. So that's our aim, is to grow them as fast as the ones in the wild.
Okay, so we do have a question coming in from YouTube. What causes the lip thickness of the conch?
So thank you for that question. The, the conch forms the lip, and it no longer can continue to make the whorls. So it's formed the lip. So
Mm-hmm.
what's happening over time is it continues to lay down more and more lip over time. And you'll see as they get really thick lips, these conchs can sometimes be like 20, 30, 40 years old. And I remember that a term in the Bahamas is called the samba conch, right? The really old conch.
Yeah.
And so they're just laying down lip, and sometimes as they get older, their lip actually erodes away just from wear and tear of moving around on the sea floor.
Right. And so, can you tell us a little bit about, the forming of the conch shell? I know I mentioned to you behind the scenes a bit earlier that I've heard someone say, "Oh, conch find their shell rather than grow it." So we've always been taught, yeah, well, conch they absorb calcium carbonate out of the ocean. How much of that is affected by the ocean, and how much of that is affected by their diet?
Right. So in the Caribbean, it's it's very high. Well, it's high temperature and high calcium carbonate. Right. We have great calcium carbonate, so we have a lot of calcium in the water. And so what's happening, and I'm going to show you this tiny little shell, right? And if you look at the very, very tip, if we were looking at it using a microscope, if we looked at that very, very, very tiny tip, that would be the larval shell.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens is it just continues to use its mantle, and I think you know it as the conch red, right? And, and so it uses its mantle, and it helps to form that shell, and it hatches with a shell. It's actually in its egg stage, it has its shell already, and it just keeps picking up that calcium from the ocean and using its mantle to form the shell. It's really quite phenomenal.
Nice. And so we did have a hello from Megan Hales to you from Port Perry.
Yeah.
Oh, lovely. So again, viewers, if you have any questions for Megan, let us know through the comments. So in just kind of talking about the conchs growing, the diet that you said you give them is some of the macroalgae. And I noticed when you showed us the tanks, you had the very large tank, and then you had some of the little smaller test tubes. Why do they move? Why do you have to put them in those larger tanks?
So what happens growing microalgae is that it multiplies logarithmically. So like if it starts with 2 cells one day, then it's 4, and then it's 8 and 16, 32, etc.
Yeah.
And so it outgrows its vessel, its tube. So we start in the test tube, and then we add the test tube to a flask, and then we add that flask to a bigger flask, and then that bigger flask to like a big 5-gallon jug. And so it allows it to grow more cells in a given amount of space. And depending on the number of conch we have will depend on how much microalgae. But we always have microalgae growing all the time because it takes anywhere from 6 to 10 days until it's ready to feed. So we always have like maybe 7 to 10 flasks that are in different stages getting ready to feed.
And so do you also grow the seagrass that you use to cue, or do you just get that after the eggs have hatched?
Yes, we went down to the water's edge of the Fishermen Association, and we waded in the seagrass. Now, we don't pull the seagrass blades off the seagrass plant. We take the detrital blades. Those are the brown ones that are falling off, and they have all these wonderful little epiphytes on them. So we're essentially just we're combing our fingers through the seagrass just to pick up the detrital brown blades, and then we bring them in so that the conch have them as a cue.
Oh, that's awesome. So we do have another question coming in from YouTube. What makes conch culture so difficult? And I'm assuming they mean by conch aquaculture. I know we've heard a lot in the Bahamas that, conch are one of the hardest types of fishery species to kind of do this with. So what does make them that much more difficult than the typical fish species?
Well, I'd actually say that it has some of the same difficulties of any species that we grow in aquaculture. But what we know about conch is that we know the life cycle, and that's the most important thing you have to learn with any aquaculture is what's the natural life cycle. That's really well known. I've been working with the species now for 40 years. So, and and there's a lot of other scientists throughout the years that have also worked with the Queen Conch. So I would say that the technology is well established. I think what makes it difficult is that they take a long time to grow. They take almost 4 years, and so some of the fish species only take maybe a year to a year and a half to grow. So that's one of the things that we need to keep in mind is, how to get the cycle going so that you always have conch that are ready to release or ready to grow for seafood.
And so, over the time that you've been working in conch, which you said has been 40 years, has there been a lot of changes in the methodology in the conch aquaculture from around the beginning when you said you were interning to now as you've been working in managing these hatcheries?
Yeah, so I would say that there's more choices available for filtration, for tank sizes. We now use LED lights instead of fluorescent lights, so we can save energy. And some practices have gotten a little simpler out of necessity. Over the years, this is my 10th hatchery that I've been working on and developing, and so over the years, sometimes out of necessity, we've had to try something different, and it actually ends up working, and so we can adapt that into the process, and it might be that much simpler to grow the conch.
Oh, science, trial and error.
Exactly.
Awesome. So we do have another hello from YouTube, and we also have another question coming in from YouTube. So is it the epiphytes on the seagrass blades that actually act as the metamorphic cue? And thanks for the question. You're welcome. So yeah, is it actually the epiphytes or is it the seagrass itself?
So I think it's a mixture, but mostly it's the epiphytes, because the epiphytes are benthic diatoms, which is a type of microalgae, or a type of phytoplankton that lives on the benthos on the bottom. And so that's the conch's first food. Okay. And so the conch's going to say, oh my gosh, this habitat is great for me. I'm going to settle here and I'm going to start eating right away. So it's a very interesting process to think about that. We're all drawn, all animals are drawn towards their food. I think people as well, right? So,
yeah, it smells good.
So it really is the epiphytes, but it might also be a tactile type of thing as well. Like when they're touching the seagrass blade, they can say, "Oh, this feels good. This feels secure. This is where I want to be."
Right. And so, as you said before, conch, as they're in their larval state, they will constantly go up and down. What was the term you said that was again?
It's a swim crawl. Swim crawl.
Yeah. Which is really cool because I think a lot of people just imagine that when the conch lays its egg mass, they hatch and they just hang around there. But they actually go through a lot in their first couple of weeks of life, just constantly avoiding predators as they go up and down. Because we're not the only ones that like to eat conch, and there are things that want to eat them in their different stages. So they really do have such a challenge, right, to just hatch out that egg and then make their way to life. And I think what you're also saying is so important is that seagrass habitats are so crucial and so important in this life stage. And I think even in the Bahamas, a lot of people, when they see seagrass, are like, ew, it's this dark spot in the ocean that I don't want to see there. But really, it's such a crucial habitat for conch and a lot of other marine species. So it's really interesting to hear that that's one of those cues that actually helps them start life, really. So
yeah. And I think also to look at the benefits that the conch give to the seagrass, as they're grazing and cleaning the seagrass. And that was one of the studies that we did in Mariah Harbor Key National Park in 2019. We, our partnership project looked at the grazing effects of conch on seagrass and how important they are to help with photosynthesis of the seagrass and the carbon sink of seagrass. So they also play a critical role in the life cycle of the seagrass as well.
See, that's so exciting. I think we do kind of forget that life is a cycle, right? Like everything has its part to play. And while the seagrass helps conch grow, conch also helps seagrass grow. And so this is just a cycle. And I'm excited to hear that the Bahamas has some really good habitats for conch to start in, right? And I know you said you've done work in the Bahamas before. Do you still have ongoing work in the Bahamas, or is you just mainly based in Puerto Rico right now?
Well, it's exciting to share with you, the viewers, that I do have 2 projects that we're working on that we're just starting to get everything organized. But
Exciting.
I have one working with BNT, the Bahamas National Trust, with Jewel up in Grand Bahama. So we'll be doing some work with the fishers in McLeanstown and looking at conch ranching. And so that's very exciting.
It is.
And then also with the Bahamas National Trust with Catherine Booker down in the Mariah Harvey Key National Park, we're also expanding a project to have a small hatchery there. And so that will also be an education, restoration, conservation hatchery, and it will be on wheels. It will be mobile, so we can take it around Great Exuma. So these are projects that are in discussion, and we're working closely with Lester Giddings and of course everybody at the Bahamas National Trust, and then the local community. I mean, community is so important. You know, the local people in the community, and the fishers, and everybody that is very interested in the Queen Conch.
Yeah, definitely. Community is definitely one of the most important things when it comes to conservation, which definitely brings you to the point of the discussion. So how can people get involved with working in Queen Conch Aquaculture? Are there internships available? Are there ways that people who maybe want to study Queen Conch Aquaculture, how can they get involved with some of this work? Whether it be in the Bahamas or wherever the hatcheries are.
Right. So we are in the process. My goal and the team that I work with and those that are interested in getting involved, the goal is to have a conch farm in every Caribbean island. So, you know, right now we've been talking about the Bahamas, we've been talking about Puerto Rico. There's also a hatchery that I've been helping with down in Curacao. And there's other interests in Jamaica and other places in the Caribbean. So we are in the process of designing an online course, like a hands-on online course called eConch. And so it's going to be available for people to learn about how to grow conch. And then a lot of our information about Queen Conch Aquaculture is on our website, which is conchaquaculture.org. Okay. And I think the viewers would find it really interesting how to get involved, learning more about what we're doing, what our current projects are. And then I see you have posted my Instagram, which is our lab's Instagram, which is Queen Conch 2020. So I like to post about what we're doing and what we're doing in the hatchery. And so I welcome people to get involved with us and to ask us questions and see how they can further along our mission and vision. Definitely. And be part of it.
Exactly. And I think it's really cool that you are launching that online course. Is that going to be something that's only available to people that have a background or a degree in marine science, or can people who are maybe just have that interest and may not, have the degree, because that's something that they'd also be able to get involved in?
We are hoping to make it available for anybody with any different background, so you don't have to come. You have to come with a passion and a desire to want to, work with conch or learn more about conch. So really, it's going to be open to everyone. Where we have, what we're going to do first is do beta testing to make sure everything works, and so we hope to do that next year, and then we'll start to launch it. So it will be a larger, but we'll continue to share information always. It won't be just limited to the course, but the course is going to be fun. It's great.
Yeah, and you guys do share a lot. I follow your Instagram, as you know, and I think if you're not following the lab on Instagram, please go and follow Queen Conch 2020 right now on Instagram, because you see the coolest little videos and images of the conch as they hatch and kind of go through their life cycle. So thank you for putting that out there, because I think a lot of people don't know what a conch looks like before it has this fully formed shell and it has all these lobes, and it's just the coolest thing to follow. So thank you for actually sharing that and putting that information out there. And I look forward to seeing, this eConch go live and having more people actually interested in the life cycle and the raising of conch, the farming of conch, aquaculture, all of those great things. But before we close out, do you have any final thoughts for our viewers? Maybe any inspiration that you might have learned along your way in this conch aquaculture?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think that the thing that really stands out for me is that all these years that I've been growing Queen Conch, and I've looked at, thousands and millions of conch over my years, I still get so inspired by them. Like every day, they still teach me. But those that I'm working with, and those that are training with me as well, I learned so much from the perspective that they bring and the questions that they ask. And so it's really an evolution of conch aquaculture. And you asked me earlier if there's new things. I think the newness comes from more people getting involved and more people participating in the community awareness and everything, and that helps to really grow the awareness in the process, and I learn from that as well. So that's part of my inspiration, is for people to continue to to ask questions, be curious. And I think the other thing that I'd like to share is that, I fell in love with the conch when I was, in my teenage years, and I knew I wanted to be a conch farmer. So I feel very fortunate that I was given that gift of curiosity and of want back then, so that I could continue to pursue my passion. So for those that are looking to pursue their passion, I really encourage you to stay on track with that.
And how beautiful is that? You fell in love with the conch as a teenager, and you're still working with conch today. And we do have, I think this is going to be my favorite comment ever in the show. Hey, Mom.
That's our son.
Awesome.
Oh, hi, Daniel.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. And the final question, and I feel like I'm going to know the answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What is your favorite sea creature and why?
Oh my gosh, Lashanti.
I know.
I have to say the Queen Conch.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. This has been a real pleasure. Really nice. Thank you so much for hosting Siren Sundays.
And thank you so much for being on the show. And you definitely are one of my supporters. I do see when you share and you like the post. So I appreciate you for finally being able to come on the show. I'm looking forward to watching your journey and your work. I'd like to thank all our viewers for watching. Thank you for riding the Siren Sundays wave with me. And a great thanks to our sponsor, Science and Perspective, because we all need a little bit of science and we all need a lot more perspective. So thank you guys for tuning in to another episode.